This is a special edition of WPTV To The Point with Michael Williams.
The Florida primary finally here as growing concerns about coronavirus affect each and every facet of our society, including this election day. All eyes on the Sunshine State to see which candidate will come out ahead. 219 delegates up for grabs tonight in the Democratic primary. Good evening and welcome to a special edition of To The Point. On the Republican side, really no contest for President Trump, but we'll talk to high-profile Republican a little later in our broadcast. The Florida primary, of course, underway as former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders face off in one of the most anticipated races because of Florida's huge importance, not only now, but come November. All roads to the White House truly do lead through Florida. But right now, coronavirus overlaying every aspect of our life, including causing polling places and workers to relocate. Many polling workers not even showing up today. Polling places, in some cases, closing in our county and across the state. What results are we likely to see throughout this evening? We welcome one of our guests this evening, Terry Rizzo, chair of the Florida Democratic Party. We thank you for being here on primary night. We'll talk to you in just a moment. But first, WPTV News Channel 5 reporter Matt Cesney joins us from the Election Central headquarters to tell us a little bit more on what we're seeing there. Matt?
Well, Michael, good evening. The fears and concerns over the virus have certainly had an impact on primary day. The polls now closing in Florida, and we do expect some results to start being released here soon at the tabulation center. But the virus, as I mentioned, has had an impact on primary day. Voter turnout has been described as light. And then, as you mentioned, we've had the issue of poll workers not showing up at the polls today. As many as 900 out of a team of 3,500 volunteers, we're told, were backing out over concerns over the coronavirus. That's led to some polling places being short-staffed. A couple polling places had to be closed, and there were some delays for voters early on this morning. And worries over the virus have also, we're told, been led to a surge in mail-in ballots by voters. A steady stream of voters were showing up at the Supervisor of Elections office today requesting mail-in ballots. They were filling them out in the parking lot and dropping them off inside, they said, rather than face any kind of crowds at the polling stations. Supervisor Wendy Satori-Link says as many as 90,000 people will be voting by mail, and it's actually changing her plans for the November election.
We've already placed an order for more envelopes because we think across the country that people are going to go to vote by mail more. And so we didn't want there to be a run on paper. So we actually ordered additional envelopes anticipating that we wanted to get in early so that we didn't have a shortage. So I think we're going to see more people doing vote by mail.
Dealing with the coronavirus was certainly unexpected and even unthinkable a month ago here. In fact, Palm Beach County has been training for months with new vote counting equipment. This is all in reaction to the recount troubles that occurred here back in 2018. So far, we are told this new voting equipment has actually been performing well. We're live in Riviera Beach. Matt Cesney, WPTV News Channel 5.
Matt, thank you much. And again, Terry Rizzo here, chair of the Florida Democratic Party. We thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me tonight.
We're talking about what, roughly 25% turnout? You and I talked about it right before air across the state?
Approximately. You know, it remains to be seen. We'll see what happens as of today. What we did have was record early turnout, right, and record vote by mail. In fact, up until this weekend when everything really hit, turnout was really on par to be extraordinary.
Did you think we should have held off on the primary? Do you think it'll give us a real robust sense of preference in Florida for the Democrats, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders?
Well, as you know, the the governor determines that. It's in the hands of the governor, so we go on with it. In fact, we have been voting for a month here in Florida with the vote by mail and early voting. And
good that we had that given us.
That's right.
Florida has been seen as Biden country, has had healthy leads in the polls. Nothing indicates that we should expect anything less than that tonight. Talk about this, of course, coronavirus overlaying every aspect of decision making by voters and what they're looking for. Your sense as you talk to fellow Democrats across the state about what motivated them ultimately over the last month to vote, and as coronavirus and its impact has exploded upon us, how it is further defining what they want to see in a Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders?
Well, what's happening, obviously, I think the fact that so many Democrats have gone to the polls, especially early, and especially vote by mail, indicates the enthusiasm that Democrats have statewide. And even during the coronavirus epidemic, we had numbers of people turn out to go to the polls today safely and making sure that everything was under control. But I think it tells you an indication of what Democrats are motivated are.
Joe Biden's pitching that I've been there, done that. I have the government leadership, the expertise as vice president, a longtime senator to handle this crisis. And again, is expected to do quite well in Florida, one of the huge delegate prizes up for grabs.
That's right.
Also Illinois and Arizona.
Right.
Tonight as well, Ohio, they held off on their primary. They're going to wait at least a few months before they hold theirs. Do you think we'll have a definitive sense after tonight about who the nominee will be? And if Joe Biden does as well as at least he's expected to do, will pressure grow on Bernie Sanders to drop out and unify quickly behind the former vice president?
Well, we'll certainly see tonight in terms of how the delegate count goes. And as you're reading the same thing I am in terms of what the delegates are expected to be and how the turnout is expected to go.
What would you prefer to see given this huge existential crisis that we're facing, the fact that some primaries are being canceled, that a lot of people say we need to streamline the process and move on. Many Democrats saying let's get behind somebody, especially with what's going on, and focus on November. I'm asking you as the Florida Democratic chair, if you're sitting at that table and had a voice after tonight, assuming that it goes the way we may expect it to for Joe Biden, would you say that the pressure from your mind that you'd say to Mr. Sanders, time to move out, unify, and let's move on?
Well, that's for Bernie Sanders to say.
What would you say?
I think that's what we're going to see after this. But what I will tell you is that I believe and I'm firmly convinced that Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are going to unite together, and their supporters are going to unite behind the Democratic nominee. And we see this because the real threat, of course, is Donald Trump.
Talk about that. Democrats talk about that, but many analysts say Democrats overplay their hand if the coronavirus and the Republican response from the White House is overplayed and politicized too much, when most people at home, and I'm hearing from many of you all the time, say, we're tired of the finger pointing. We just want solutions to the paychecks we're losing, to the jobs we're worried about, to the health for ourselves and for our loved ones. Democrats walk a very fine line there. Talk about that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we need to address in terms of voting are ways that will make voting safer and easier for people as we move forward. I mean, we see, for example, vote by mail is a way to go. I think what we need to do is, if we are truly committed to the principle of every vote, for one person, one vote, and it counts, that we'll explore new ways and other ways to make sure that every vote does get in.
Talk about the strengths of a Joe Biden vis-a-vis President Trump. We'll be talking to a GOP operative a short while for that perspective, but your take.
I think he has significant leadership. He's been in leadership before under President Obama. He has great experience in leading the country and in leading people around the country and in leading programs. He's led the response to national disasters and has a lot of experience in that regard.
And Bernie Sanders is moving the party farther to the left, including Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders for Medicare for All, Joe Biden not. But clearly, whether it's on issues about tuition, on issues about hastening the expansion of the Affordable Care Act, for the former vice president's preference, moving the party, at least in some ways, farther left on platform. Talk about that, what kind of platform we'll see from Democrats come November as this continues to roll out, and at least for the moment appears that it's rolling toward a Biden candidacy.
As it seems that way now, but what remains to be seen in terms of the platform. And I think the platform issues are significant. Democrats are addressing the needs of the people of the country. We see this in terms of health care coverage. One of the major significant platforms of the Democrats is coverage, that accessible coverage for all.
As leader of the Florida Democratic Party, talk about what you want to see Democrats doing in terms of helping Americans with coronavirus and the ways you see them being able to differentiate themselves very keenly in terms of the pocketbook issues that so many at home are worried about as we look at the two candidates, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Talk about the differentiation you and Democrats want to see in terms of policy proposals going on Capitol Hill right now and where you can really set yourselves apart vis-a-vis Republicans.
Well, I think the bills that have been passed by the Democratic Congress are indicative of this. We want to see bills that affect the paycheck Americans, the average American who is struggling, who is one healthcare crisis away, and this is Exhibit A of this kind of a situation, one healthcare crisis away from bankruptcy, from having not being able to put food on the table. So we want programs, Democrats do, that help support average working class American citizens, and not the corporations and the wealthy.
Either way, of course, the calculus may well change given what's going on with coronavirus and questions about leadership, both from the White House, but also among Democrats. There have been arguments that for decades, both Democratic and Republican administrations have neglected health care budgeting in this country, and we're going to see that as part of the big debate. Suddenly, where weeks ago, Brian Crowley, one of our analysts, always tells me, you never know, these elections and issues come up, and goodness knows, coronavirus has thrown a curveball here. But coronavirus will now be the litmus test for leadership, the litmus test for differences in programs that will be rolled out come November. Talk about that.
Well, absolutely it is, and I, as I said, this is Exhibit A, and it certainly is affecting us today, and we'll see it going forward. The fact that we're sitting this far away from each other, the fact that we have to social distance.
Our social distance.
I know we have to do this. It's affecting each and every one of us consistently. We need to be concerned, and President Trump, of course, delayed, denied, and distorted the facts on coronavirus. His leadership is under question, and some of certainly the policies that he did not do. We could have had programs months ago, and this should have been implemented months ago. The fact is, we are where we are now. We need to see leadership coming from the White House, and Congress actually has been taking the lead on this. Governors have been taking the lead because of the lack of leadership coming from President Trump on this. I think there's a clear distinction.
And yet Republicans are going to push back on that and again argue that Democrats are politicizing this issue, and they're also going to argue that we have a Republican governor in Florida that many are fairly happy with, not only right now, but in terms of his overall leadership. It's going to be a tough sell, and if coronavirus, if it is corralled, and we all hope it is, regardless of your political affiliation, that will accrue to the president and his credit if we're able to get a handle on this on into the summer.
We all need to contribute to this, and public safety is job number one. We all need to do our parts, and we all need to keep ourselves and others under consideration.
Purely political question, how pivotal was it to you when the former vice president said point blank, a woman will be my vice president?
Well, as a woman,
what did you hear from Democrats after that throughout the state?
Democrats,
hoorahs, I imagine.
Most definitely, yeah. It's time.
All right. Terry Rizzo, Florida Democratic Chair, any final thoughts?
I think that we need to consider, especially voting going forward. I think taking into account new ways of voting that will allow everybody to cast their vote. Vote by mail is certainly something that we need to consider statewide. And I think there should be, frankly, a special session called by the legislature to address this particular issue and address vote by mail, to expand vote by mail and expand the days that mails are allowed to be counted.
All with coronavirus in mind and with November coming up.
Certainly is a major, and as I said, Exhibit A as to why this is necessary. This is Florida. These things happen, and the unknowns are unknown.
All roads to the White House go through Florida. It will be competitive as always. Yeah. We appreciate your time. We know you're watching the returns as they will come in across the state.
Do we have any news?
Yeah, not yet. We're going to wait for NBC projections here just ahead. Which candidate President Trump will likely face off with in November? More on that, of course, as Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders compete tonight and onward. Stay with us. Welcome back to this special edition of To The Point. Now with us, our next guest, Michael Barnett, chairman of the Palm Beach County Republican Party. As always, thank you for being here. A familiar face on To The Point. We appreciate your time.
Glad to be here.
Republican primary, really no contest, token opposition for President Trump in Florida. So the big question automatically as we jump to November, and coronavirus will very much in so many ways define what people think and who they vote for come November. You heard Ms. Rizzo, chair of the Florida Democratic Party. Democrats are going to hammer away again and again on his leadership and perceived slowness to respond to the severity of the coronavirus crisis. Your comments, your response.
Well, we heard today that the crisis could extend all the way through July or even August. We're hoping that's not the case. But with regards to the president's leadership, the Republican Party is almost unanimously united behind the president and has been for several months, if not the last 3 years. With regards to the corona crisis itself, just look at what Democrats have said. This is not a partisan issue. It's bipartisan, if anything. Coronavirus attacks indiscriminately, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, whether you live in California, where Governor Gavin Newsom has said that the president has done everything that he was asked to do, whether you have Governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, who recently said that the president is on it and is
But
keeping Americans safe.
they've also been in a Twitter war, sniping back and forth about the response. And the president also called the Democratic governor of Washington a snake, quote unquote, as the crisis broke out. So there has been a lot of friction between Democrats and Republicans.
Friction,
on this
but
issue.
there's no doubt that the president is taking steps necessary to keep the American people safe. Who can deny that? He's made billions of dollars available for state governments to tackle this crisis. The Dow Jones jumped 1,000 points just this afternoon on word that the Treasury Department was going to release or make available $850 billion to tackle the coronavirus. People like myself with student debt, I'm going to have interest, he's wiping out interest on these student loans. People who are most susceptible to coronavirus, people on Medicare, 62 million Americans are going to have expanded health care because of the steps the president is taking.
The president and Congress, it's a bipartisan package they're trying to work on. No question, though, now, the very definition of electability and leadership will revolve around the coronavirus response in the coming months. And it was President Trump, then businessman Donald Trump in 2013, who, critiquing President Obama, said, when you're leading, and I'm slightly paraphrasing, but when you're the leader, leadership means that it's all on you, if it gets done or if it doesn't get done. And that same critique is going to be applied to him now.
That's right. President Trump has been through a lot of personal crises. His administration these last 3 years, you could say that it's prepared him to deal with this crisis right now.
Some argue, though, that he is ill-prepared. Democrats argue he's ill-prepared, that he negated the severity of the crisis.
Of course, it's an election year. What else are they going to say?
Well,
they're going to attack the president. They're in the middle of a presidential primary. They're choosing between a vice president who doesn't know where he is half the time and a socialist. They'd like to prefer to keep the attention on President Trump and how he tackles the coronavirus crisis. But I think at the end of
none of that critique is fair.
I think a lot of it is unfair. I think the president is doing a great job. He's keeping Americans safe.
Is it any more fair to attack the mental acuity of a former vice president who served a long time in the United States Senate? I mean, is that the kind of race we're going to end up with?
I think it bears on whether or not he's able to govern. I think it's fair game, absolutely.
Democrats, and I had one last week, say if you want to talk about the ability to lead and intellect and acuity, that's the debate we're happy to have all day long with Joe Biden vis-a-vis President Donald Trump. Your response?
My response, let the voters decide. I think the American people have been very happy with the job the president has done, and we're going to see at the end of this coronavirus crisis, hopefully in a few months, the president will come out stronger. It shouldn't be anybody's goal to look at a political gain or benefit with regards to how you're dealing with a crisis like this when lives are at stake. But if the Democrats want to make this political, that's on them. The president is focusing on keeping America safe, limiting exposure, and protecting lives.
I asked Democrats, and I'll ask Republicans because you raise a fair point. Ask Democrats. They risk over-politicizing it, but Republicans also can risk over-politicizing this issue as well. How do Republicans ride that fine line? Just as I asked the Democratic chair, it's a fine line for all because the feedback we get every day, and I'm sure even now people are saying, we really don't care about the finger pointing from Democrats to Republicans or from the White House and other Republicans toward Democrats. How in the coming months do you all thread that line carefully?
No, nobody's pointing fingers. Absolutely not. We're taking this serious as a heart attack. This has been an inconvenience and a disruption in our party's operations, but we're still working. We've had to cancel a few meetings. We've had to postpone our fundraiser here in Palm Beach County because our most important priority is safety.
What's the best way that you want to see Republicans in the aid packages we're looking at? We're talking about an $850 billion stimulus package being debated now on top of what's already been discussed. What's going to be the biggest differentiation as we look at outreach vis-a-vis the Democratic packages being put together and as President Donald Trump makes his message, makes his pitch to the American voter on into the summer and fall?
I think leadership that President Trump has shown has spoken for itself with regards to the action that he's taken. A lot of Republicans may not be happy with the amount of spending taking place, but he knows it's for Americans' best interest. We're saving lives, and the Democrats want to politicize this. That's not fair. It's not fair to the president, but this is an election. This is politics. That's the nature of how these things go.
Can you, with a straight face, say if there was a Democratic administration here, Republicans wouldn't be doing the same thing?
They shouldn't be doing the same thing.
But would they be?
I don't know. I don't think so. I certainly wouldn't. And I'm saying it with a straight face.
Let me ask you one final question. Florida, of course, always pivotal. Barack Obama took Florida. Then, of course, President Donald Trump, close race, but wins in 2016. All roads to the White House, as we say again and again and again, lead through Florida. As this race shapes up, and again, the coronavirus response will be central to that, but for the president, you got to have Florida. Talk about that.
Well, there's no more important swing state than Florida. All eyes are on Florida, regardless of a coronavirus scare, especially Palm Beach County, where the president lives. He's chosen to make Palm Beach County his home. His home. Absolutely. So we are political ground zero for all news crews around the country and around the world who want to focus on the election in this country. It's going to be very exciting. We have a lot to showcase here in Palm Beach County. We're proud of our president. We support him, and we believe he'll get another 4 years.
Thank you for your robust response to the Democratic argument. Our analysts will be coming up next. We'll see what they have to say as we look at the race. Again, the Republican primary in Florida, a foregone conclusion, but on to November as all of us try to put together the political calculus of how coronavirus will impact what voters think about both the president and the eventual Democratic nominee. It's going to be an interesting debate as all of us hope for solutions to this crisis. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Michael.
Coming up, all eyes on Florida tonight. Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden. Stay with us. Just ahead, our roundtable up next. Of course, municipal races in play tonight as well, but also focusing on the big Florida primary. Stay with us. Welcome back. Our roundtable will be with me in just a moment. But first, we want to go to Michelle Casada on this Super Tuesday night in Florida, with coronavirus, of course, being so very much on all of our minds and overlaying every thought and decision and impacting polling and turnout today. Michelle's live at the main library at Summit Boulevard in West Palm Beach with how voting felt so different for some today. Michelle.
Well, Michael, as you know, the polls are closed now. We saw the ballots picked up just a few minutes ago. And many of the voters who came out to this location on Summit Boulevard told me that they were in and out of there in 10 minutes. Super easy to vote today. But we know that there were other voters in Palm Beach County that faced serious issues. One of the first people at her polling site, Stephanie Myers, didn't expect a lot of people, but she expected the right ballot.
Said, well, how do you not have the correct ballots? I don't even understand that. What ballots do you have?
She was one of several voters whose ballots may have gotten mixed up when polling sites changed due to coronavirus concerns. Those fears visible, seeing the lack of voter turnout and campaign groups.
It's starting to pick up right now. It was quiet about the past 2 hours.
At First Christian Church on Congress Avenue, poll workers put a glove on the door to minimize contact.
Wearing gloves, sanitizing right after each person.
Myers says she had to go to the Supervisor of Elections office to vote. She says she would have liked to see elections postponed, given that some polling locations changed and there was mix-ups because of it.
There's a lot of older people that live in my neighborhood, and I just know, they don't get the whole program sometimes of, they don't want to drive somewhere else.
And many people were able to resolve their issues at the Palm Beach County Supervisor of Elections office. In West Palm Beach, Michelle Casada. Michael, back to you.
Michelle, thank you. We're hearing some numbers as we introduce our familiar faces. Brian Crowley and Mariana Mancuso, our wonderful WPTV News Channel 5 political analyst. I think we have some full screen numbers as we're looking early on. Polls closing at 7, except for the Panhandle. And the former vice president was predicted to do very well in Florida. It was going to be considered and is considered a big prize. We'll talk about voter turnout, but right now, at least according to some early numbers, again, my vision there, about 11% reporting, 57% for Joe Biden, 21% for Bernie Sanders. Tulsi Gabbard, Hawaiian Congresswoman, really a non-factor, though she officially and nominally stays in the race. As we come back out live, voter turnout, of course, has been suppressed, and no doubt a coronavirus played a huge role in that. But as we begin to look at numbers, begin to look at exit polling, and we're waiting for any projections we get, we've got Florida on tap tonight, Arizona, Illinois, big prizes. Ohio took itself out of the primary sweepstakes tonight because of coronavirus concerns. What are you seeing in terms of some numbers? Begin to give us the lay of the land,
yeah,
Brian.
Well, updating the numbers a little bit, with nearly 20% of the vote in Florida. Joe Biden's at 59%, okay. So keeping in that same range with Bernie Sanders at 21%. Mm-hmm. There's an interesting NBC exit poll in Florida that showed 66% of Democratic voters wanted someone other than someone who could beat Trump.
Mm-hmm. Electability.
Electability.
I heard that when
issue.
I talked to voters over the last week.
It was a little different for voters 45 and younger,
mm-hmm.
but still most of the 45 and younger voters also said they wanted somebody who could beat Trump. So that would, and in Palm Beach County, just as an add-on here, in Palm Beach County with about a third of the vote in, there's 65% for Joe Biden and 14% for Bernie Sanders.
Mariana, any surprises to you as you look at the political landscape and what voters are saying in exit polling and the mood in Florida right now?
I think that we're going to see a lower voter turnout today. I went to the polls around 11 o'clock this morning, and I was the 55th person to vote, which is really unfortunate given the fact that they had been open since 7 a.m. I hope that that was just an error and that everyone was running to the polls after they left work today. But the reality is that we have to be vigilant in staying a social distance away from each other and being very careful. So I think that there's going to be less voter turnout to the polls in person.
But then do we have an accurate barometer of the mood of voters, given that we had a lot of early voting? What barometer does this give us for voting and the mood of people if we're seeing such low turnout, such concerns? And how do Democrats look at that and kind of tweak that, think about that as they look to November against President Donald Trump?
Well, we may learn more in the exit polling, but I think that enough people will have voted today in Florida that it will be a pretty good representation of what a higher voter turnout would have done. I don't think the numbers, the difference between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden is so big that I don't know that, exponentially more voters would have significantly changed the percentage.
And you could argue people, Mariana, who go out and vote early, perhaps in some ways, some of them are enthusiastic to vote early, although certainly if you go out on election day, you can make the same argument. But look at the race as it shapes up. We saw the debate with them the other night, electability, a key issue. I was interviewing Democrats non-scientifically last week, but every single one of them, Stewart, a couple I remember interviewing at a park, said, listen, it's about we want our politics to become less polarizing. We want, from the Democratic point of view, electability, and it seems those themes are at least playing out in the early exit polling.
Yeah, we saw on Sunday night with Vice President and Bernie Sanders among the debate, we saw Vice President Joe Biden come out and be a very steady, pragmatic voice. He was, as I saw in one report, quote, the avatar of normalcy, and he showed that he could be a leader and focus on science in a time of crisis, and that's what everyone's looking for right now. Now, I will say that based on data that I have right here, we've seen 141,000 more mail-in voters today versus 2016. So that says that a lot of people were dropping their ballots in the mail. So maybe the turnout physically to the polls might not be as high as they would have hoped. However, we are seeing a higher number in terms of mail-in vote ballots.
Again, it's all supposition at this point because we're in such uncharted territory, but you have Ohio that canceled their primary, others like Louisiana moving them back. Will there be, in your mind, and you've been on the political beat longer than anybody I know, Brian, will there be additional pressure depending on how the night plays out? But Florida's not really a surprise. You've both been saying for weeks it was Biden country. How does it impact the calls within the Democratic Party about saying, can we end this even earlier, get behind Biden with the uncertainty about the primary schedule, with November looming large, with coronavirus really being the backdrop for all of that? What is your sense of the message and calls there will be in the coming days?
Yeah, I think the calls and the messages asking Bernie Sanders to step aside will increase. I think we should note that when Bernie Sanders insisted on having the debate on Sunday, he knew he wasn't going to do well in these states. He acknowledged that himself. So, he appears to want to stay in long enough to try to create some pressure that his agenda will become part of what the next nominee, presumably Joe Biden, would adopt, at least some of. I'm just not sure that that's going to work really well for Bernie Sanders. And, I think some people may be pushing him even harder to get out after tonight's results, but I don't know that Sanders listens to a lot of traditional Democrats when it comes to their opinions on things.
Yeah. Mariana?
I would have to agree. I mean, Sunday night we saw Bernie Sanders advancing his agenda and his own interests while Joe Biden was addressing the country in crisis. And every time Bernie Sanders was asked, how are you going to handle this? How would you handle China? How would you move this forward? What would you do? He brought this back to Medicare for all. And the reality was he was pushing his agenda and not focusing on the needs of Americans. And I think that resonated with a lot of Americans on Sunday night, that they realized that Joe Biden would have their interests first.
I asked Terry Rizzo, Florida chair of the Democratic Party. They have their talking points about the president's leadership from their point of view. that they think has been late and lacking. Michael Barnett, Republican, pushed back hard against that. The reality is, although our first and foremost concern for all of us, and I have elderly parents, and we all have concerns about livelihoods and jobs, but the reality is you cannot separate leadership and politics from each other, and the debate's going to become fierce about who can provide that. And the president may win the day on that argument, depending on how this rolls out, but it will certainly, coronavirus now becomes the issue for the 2020 campaign, and there's really just no way to know how that will play out and who might overplay or underplay their hand in that regard, Brian.
Well, you know, we've seen in the last few days a more serious President Trump. We've seen somebody who's talking more about the health-related issues and the periphery issues that are involved. He's doing a little less of the, blaming others, going back and looking at Obama. You know, I think if he continues on that path, people will quickly forget, unless they're Democrats, they're going to quickly forget what he said in the early stages of this, because as we move forward with this thing and as it gets worse, which it will, it's going to be the actions that get taken from this point forward that are going to mean the most to people. You wish the president could do a better job of calming people down. That's why we see the stores empty, and as everybody now jokes, the run on toilet paper. But I think that
some
people will start looking.
I
think some people will be looking for results as we move on down. And let me just add that in the United Kingdom, there's their leading medical and scientific people are saying that this virus will last until May 2021. We've kind of had this thing that this virus is going to end in 2 weeks. That's not true.
And Mariana, for Democrats, they're going to press their health care arguments. You heard Bernie Sanders tonight say Medicare for all. If we had more centralized health care, we could deal with this more effectively. Former Vice President Biden arguing, let's expand the Affordable Care Act. So in that sense, you're going to see the connection between some of the issues near and dear to Democrats on debt relief, on health care. And it's going to be interesting, the Republican response on that, and how that really redefines in every way the kinds of issues we're talking about income or income inequality, about health care, about student debt relief, about the kind of packages coming out of Congress and what they mean directly to people in our community and elsewhere in the bottom line. And to me, it's just such an unknown right now. It's impossible for any of us to know, but it's going to be very much the fiber and substance of this campaign moving forward.
Well, coronavirus has definitely changed the entire dynamic of this election. There's no question. However, the other part of this election is now the economy. The president has tied himself to the economy is booming and jobs are soaring. Everything is fantastic under President Trump. And the reality is that the stock market has plummeted almost day after day. It has little recovery, and we haven't even begun to see the financial ramifications of the coronavirus yet.
But Democrats do risk overplaying their hand. I mean, this is an act of nature, some say an act of God. And so, again, Democrats are already being cautioned that there's plenty of, you hate to say it, there's going to be plenty of discussion at minimum, if not blame, about a system in America where for successive administrations, Democrat and Republican, statewide, countywide, nationally, not been necessarily the kind of approach that even remotely was needed to address this crisis.
I think that the Democrats are going to have to walk a very fine line of bringing science to the forefront and bringing in a calm, steady voice to this crisis as well as solutions. At the same time, they have to be careful not to overplay their hand in terms of saying, well, the president said the economy was doing well and look at the stock market, this is awful, even though that is not an indicator of the economy. However, according to the president, that is.
We'll be back with more on this special edition of To the Point. Hold that thought, Brian. You're looking very dapper tonight.
Thank you, sir.
We'll be back in a moment. Coming up, the president hopes to hold Florida in November. Which Democrat, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, likely to face off with them right now? Joe Biden doing well in Florida. Stay with us. Welcome back. Of course, the Florida presidential primary, a top focus tonight. Voter turnout estimated to be in the maybe 25% range statewide for Democrats. Again, on the Republican side, no real opposition for President Trump as he waits to see who will face off against in November. And right now, Joe Biden doing very, very well, as expected in Florida. We'll have more on that. Municipal races that we are keeping an eye on. We want to show you one of them right now. And not a huge surprise here at all. Scott Singer, the incumbent in the Boca Raton mayor's race, and with 71% of the vote reporting right now, well, you see the numbers for yourself. An overwhelming margin against challenger Bernard Corn. We'll keep an eye on that and have Cruz there as well. But again, no huge surprise there right now. We'll keep an eye on those municipal races as well. Coming back out live to the Florida primary, and the politics of the moment were going to be so huge and are, but really have been subsumed by coronavirus and what that means going forward. Right now, what are you seeing latest on Florida, Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders?
NBC's Decision 2020 with 58% of the vote in has Biden at 60.2%, Sanders at 21.9%. And just as an aside, Bloomberg at 10.3%.
There you go. And for the $400 million he spent on his campaign, he's probably glad he got something out of it besides the great voters of American Samoa for all the effort he put here. Mariana, kind of lead off here. Joe Biden, as both of you noted, Florida was really Biden country, given a more centrist Democratic base throughout the state. So any real surprises that he has this kind of lead? And we also note 219 delegates up for grabs here. They're awarded proportionally. We're tied for the third biggest prize with New York, California, Texas, then us in New York. So big night for Joe Biden. It only would seem to further cement his front-runner status. Illinois hasn't closed yet, nor Arizona. Ohio put off its primary. But it shapes up as a night that for Joe Biden really extends that lead and may change the dynamics of the discussions in the coming days. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, barring any craziness that could happen in Illinois or Arizona, Joe Biden is looking to having a fantastic night here in the Sunshine State. And, you know, in 2016, Hillary Clinton won Florida with 64.4% of the vote. And that was huge for her. She took home 141 delegates, and then she took the nomination, and here we are. But Joe Biden has a real opportunity here. And the reason is, aside from it being a very centrist candidate, Bernie Sanders has done better with Hispanic voters. However, it's been problematic because Florida, a majority of our Hispanic voters are Cuban American, and we know that Bernie Sanders has basically not been afraid to actually applaud the socialism of former President
on the education front.
Fidel Castro.
Let me ask you, Brian, talk about President Trump's strengths in Florida. Of course, again, coronavirus we've talked about, but even above and beyond that, with that as part of the discussion, talk about the president's strengths in a possible matchup against Joe Biden, should this continue to shake out that way on through the nominating process in Florida, which is so key to anyone who wants to either continue to occupy the White House or win re-election against President Trump.
Well, one of his biggest strengths is Governor Ron DeSantis, who ran as a guy who totally supported Trump. He continues to totally support Trump. And DeSantis, I think, has even surprised some Democrats with his approach on some issues that traditionally Republicans have not been on the front of, like the environment and helping out with the Everglades and issues like that. And and he certainly has done some things that Democrats strongly oppose. But and a lot of Florida Democrats are moderates, and it's going to be up to, if Biden's the nominee, he's got to hang on to those moderates, and then he's got to be able to cross over and get some independent votes, possibly some leaning Republican votes. But DeSantis could be a real strong player for Trump in the state.
Mariana, talk about the president's strengths as he will bring his campaign and his message to this oh-so-critical state come November.
Well, the strength of the president is that he won Florida in 2016. And I think that he's looking for a rerun of that victory in 2020. And I think that working with Governor DeSantis will be an opportunity for him, and it will be interesting to see how the governor does play with the president in terms of going into the general election, because we've seen that while the president, tweeted out his endorsement of Governor DeSantis during the primary governor's race, the reality is that since then you've watched the governor kind of keep the president at an arm's distance, and I don't think that that's going to be able to be sustainable as we get further into the general election.
We talk about the Democratic criticisms of the White House response, and we have to note, though, that even despite what many argue is a halting rollout in terms of response and messaging, there's a lot of time, as you said a little while ago, Brian, to make up ground on that, first and foremost to help Americans in our community and to help people, whatever their background in our community. But there's a lot of chance to make up ground as well. Leadership will be defined here, much as former President George W. Bush, Hurricane Katrina hurt them in the midterms on into 2006 because of what was perceived as a halting response to Hurricane Katrina. But the flip side is there's great opportunity for the White House as well to turn that around come November.
Well, I also think that a lot of folks are going to be looking to see what their governors are doing. So, the governors really are the first line of defense in the states, because they're the ones that can make changes in the states. And some of the governors, DeSantis has done a very, very good job. Andrew Cuomo in New York, he's a guy that just today stood in front of the cameras and said, don't blame your mayors, don't blame your cities, don't blame your counties for what we're doing. I'm responsible. I'm the guy closing the bars. I'm the guy closing the restaurants. Mm-hmm. And over again, he said, I'm responsible. It was a really strong show of leadership. And I think that's the first place people look, because what happens in the White House, what happens out of Congress, I think, frankly, most voters have aren't always convinced that the White House, any White House, not the Trump White, any White House can react as fast as their governors and their local officials can. So if the governors do really well, and especially the governors in Republican states like Florida, I think that can help Trump.
And talk about, we always talk about, at the end of the day, people vote pocketbook first so often. And we have a pocketbook challenge that really is almost beyond the grasp to comprehend now. And that's why we're really moving into uncharted territory on how that will impact and influence people's decisions later this year, Mariana.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we haven't even begun to feel the financial ramifications in the economy of everything that is happening right now. And not only that, pumping the entire system full of money and passing spending bills and increasing this and that, the reality is that until we bring back manufacturing jobs, it makes it very difficult for people to go out and to spend those things if they don't have the money, if the things are not being manufactured. For example, if we look at an iPhone shortage that hasn't even happened yet, those are things that are going to affect us in our day-to-day life, but we haven't even begun to feel those things.
And talk about, Ms. Rizzo, Florida Democratic Party chair, brought this up. We talk about the voting process itself, already concerns after the last election about interference, ability, or efforts to try and hack our system. So we now have coronavirus, not going away anytime soon, although we all dearly wish it would. Talk about the voting process itself and how that alone could skew voter turnout, if people go out to vote, if they're able to vote, if we can do enough to surge mail-in ballots for people to have a chance to vote, and how all of the dynamic of voting itself is going to change with questions about, we saw today about the safety of even going to vote. That's going to be a huge part of the dynamic about confidence in the voting system come November, Brian.
Well, I think we are,
regardless of party,
I think we are way past due. I think the state of Florida, and I think every state should do this, should hire Google and maybe Amazon and their best experts and turn over voting to them, or bring in their technology. We ought to be able to vote from home on our phones.
Well, it's not going to happen by November, though.
But I'm saying that,
they're having trouble getting up a website on coronavirus.
With the existing system between now and November. I think we need to start thinking about new ways of voting that make it easier for people to vote and perhaps more secure. I don't know would impact the.
Does a suppressed turnout vote if that were to happen? Does that help?
If the virus is as bad in November as it is today, that'll suppress voting. I think a bad economy will suppress voting. I think that we keep having problems when people go to vote. Where if we continue to have, let's hope the count is good tonight. Let's hope we don't have run into any issues anywhere in the state with the results, because people are starting to doubt our ability to get it done right.
Mariana?
I would agree to Brian's point. The reality is that this has been a series of follies in terms of elections. We had the issue in Iowa. Now we may have, if we have an issue, people are scared to show up to vote because of coronavirus. And I want to say, though, I want to pivot off of that just to say one thing. We are very fortunate in this country to have hit 2020 to just now be embarking in situations where people are afraid to vote. I'm not saying that is a good thing, but I'm saying there are many countries around this world that they are fearful for their lives, not even just their health, but their lives, to show up to vote. And the fact that in America we have the opportunity to go and vote and to cast our votes and get to participate in civic duty like this is absolutely fantastic. And the reality is we have to take all measures to make sure that people are safe and that they are healthy when they come and when they go.
Final thoughts first, Brian, then Mariana, before we go to break. I mean, this is really an historic opportunity for a Joe Biden, a Bernie Sanders still in it too, or President Donald Trump to have that historic moment where people have that aha moment of feeling the leadership they have, it rises to the moment. And so really it's ripe for either the incumbent or candidate here. I mean, it's nothing less than that truly, and we overuse the phrase historic moment, for Americans to see who is addressing their concerns, their pocketbook concerns, their concerns for loved ones, their jobs, their futures of their communities. I mean, we really stand at a pivot point, Brian.
Yeah, and I think we stand as a pivot point as communities, too, at this point. I was in the grocery store the other day, and a man picked up the last carton of eggs, and there was a woman that walked up, and she needed eggs, too. He didn't know this woman. He broke the carton in half and gave her 6 eggs. I thought that was just a beautiful moment. We need a little bit more of that.
And Mariana, your thoughts? Go ahead.
I would agree. I think that as we move into the next phase of this election cycle, I think that when we look at just overall voting pocketbook issues, looking at the economy, looking at jobs, the reality is people are going to vote for who makes them feel safe and secure in this nation.
We thank you both, and for those of you who've been joining us on air, but also perhaps online, we're going to continue our conversation right now on Facebook Live, all of our streaming platforms, WPTV app, Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV. We'll take your questions. We thank you for being here. We'll have complete results throughout the night. Michael Williams here for Brian Crowley, Mariana Mancuso, and our entire team. Good night.